So I want to welcome everyone to the Parisi podcast. I am Steve Leo. I'm going to be your host again this week. I'm lucky enough to have Eric Cressey on for our podcast this week. He's down in beautiful San Diego, so not a tough place to be right now, getting ready to work with his team out there. But I'm going to let him introduce himself. If you don't know who Eric Cressey is, he is probably the baseball guy right now. Works with tons of major league players, minor league players, all the way down to high school level. I know I've heard amazing things about him. I've been a fan as well, reading a lot of his work. So I'm going to let him do an intro on himself, and then maybe I'll fill in the gaps a little. So Eric, thank you so much for coming on. I appreciate it.
Sure. No sweat. Thanks for having me. Cliff notes, I guess, would be, I did my undergraduate at the University of New England. Actually started out at Babson College thinking I was going to be an accountant, and then caught the training bug and nutrition bug and actually transferred to the University of New England, did a double major in exercise science and sports and fitness management. And then went on to the University of Connecticut for my graduate degree. And it was at UConn where I was kind of up in the air on which path I wanted to take, whether it was more clinical research, stuff like that, or, clinical exercise physiology. And I just so happened that while I was there, I caught the strength and conditioning bug, and I was fortunate to have some good mentors, and actually spent most of my time at UConn working with men's basketball, men's and women's basketball, men's and women's soccer, a little bit with field hockey, and, got exposed to a wide variety of stuff. And actually always thought I was going to go into college strength and conditioning, particularly with respect to the basketball sector. And after I finished up, opportunity came up to work at a facility in Southern Connecticut. And so I went that route, wanted to build something in the private sector. And that eventually led me to head up to Boston, where another facility was open up. And long story short, some of the first guys I started working with in Massachusetts were baseball players. It was a couple of high school baseball players. And just so happened that, the four of those guys wound up winning a state championship. One of them won state player of the year, and they all went on to play college baseball. And my phone started ringing off the hook. So that led us to open our original Cressey Sports Performance facility in 2007. And it was an opportunity to kind of carve out this baseball niche in Massachusetts. And what really happened was high school guys became college guys became pro guys, and they had teammates, they had agents, they had teams. So we started getting referrals from all over the place. In 2014, we opened our second location. It was in Jupiter, Florida. We just expanded it and built out a larger space in Palm Beach Gardens, Florida. So we have the two facilities. And deal with guys from all 30 major league organizations. And this past December, I signed on to be director of player health and performance for the New York Yankees. So that's what brought me to San Diego. I'm currently in the MLB bubble. I'm actually spending my 10th wedding anniversary in the bubble today. So my wife is a very, very patient woman from afar. And that kind of
happy anniversary.
Thank you very much. I'd say that's the Cliff Notes, but I guess it wasn't really that short.
No. I think, listen, obviously you have a tremendous background, and I know a couple of the things about you that I'll fill in if you're okay with. I know you've spoken obviously all around. Yeah. You were on a Perform Better tour. I've seen you speak live myself. I know you've written, I think, 4 or 5 books, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I kind of lose track, to be honest.
Yeah. I think 4 or 5. Yeah. I think I have 2, so I got to get a couple more from you. I know you've done some DVDs. I follow you. I get all your weekly newsletters and videos, and I think you do a tremendous job with that. I think we need more people like you who take that approach and really try to keep it simple. I like how you do, you'll send an article or a newsletter, blog, whatever word you want to use these days, and also include a little video to it. I think it's very easy to digest because it's all in little snippets. So I've definitely enjoyed the way you presented your content. I think it's good for our industry. We need more of that. Thank you.
I think, when we go into this field, we obviously we want to make a living, we want to impact athletes and all that, but I think we have a, responsibility to pay it forward, try to grow the industry in different ways. So, whether that's, doing my podcast or writing or doing Instagram posts or whatever it is, or presenting obviously at clinics with Perform Better and others. I think it's important for us to kind of set the stage for the next generation of coaches that are coming through. And that's something that selfishly, I've also used as an opportunity for me to learn. Every time you write something, you have to organize your thoughts a little bit better. And I think it makes you a better communicator to your athletes when you teach those things. But also it makes you, kind of critically analyze what you're doing, why you're doing it, how you're doing it. So writing, presenting has actually made me a much better strength coach and a better teacher. Because, really, whether it's in the private sector or in my role in pro baseball, like I have to lead. And that's not something I was naturally equipped to do. So I think those things have, a lot of ways kind of prepared me to scale, the education that we're trying to do for other coaches.
Yeah, I think everyone's thankful for it. There aren't as many people like you out there in the industry. You get a lot of people who, in a way, want to hide what they know.
Yeah.
And I've experienced that myself in my 20-some years as a strength coach as well. And I think we just need more people like you that want to share, because there are so many athletes that can benefit from it. And at the end of the day, I feel it's about the athlete. It's not about us.
Yeah, a rising tide lifts all ships. We're in an industry that's remarkably dynamic in nature. If you look at where strength and conditioning research was, 15, 20 years ago, everything was just aerobic exercise, and we were just starting to scratch the surface. Nowadays, there's new stuff coming out each day, and it's you can get very complacent very quickly if you're not careful. So you do need to stay on top of it, and that's why I think things like this, having the ability to listen to podcasts in the car, obviously in 2020 doing Zoom calls and things like that. I think it's great, because I joke with our interns, like at our facilities, like guys come in and they have a 42-page curriculum that we work to get through over the course of the internship, and they've already gone through like a 10-week online course before they even show up. So it's this very regimented kind of curriculum. And I just tell them, like, you guys have no idea how good it is. Like I started out in this field, like I didn't write my first email till my freshman year of college in 1999. And there was just nothing out there. Like we had to like just experiment and see what worked and try to learn. But I can remember, 2001, 2002, every Friday afternoon, hitting refresh, waiting for the new T Nation update from Charles Poliquin or Ian King or any of those guys to come out. And nowadays, it's almost like an embarrassment of riches from a continuing education standpoint. So there's no excuse to not be a pro, like a good strength coach nowadays. There's so many resources out there to really help you if you're willing to put in the time and effort.
No, there's so much information out there. Just a quick story on us. When I started with Bill back in the late 90s, we would train on Saturday mornings like everyone would train. And by 1 o'clock, we'd grab lunch and we'd pop in VHS tapes of Paul Check and anyone else we could find. And that's when you had to order a videotape on the back of a magazine, you had to rip it off and mail it in and pray a videotape would show up at your house in 3 weeks. So
it's incredible.
It's a lot different now. It's definitely a lot different now. So, as far as, working with baseball players, I have a few questions I want to ask, and obviously we can kind of, expand upon them. But I think one of the biggest ones, I'm sure you've answered this before, but we'll go through it again. As far as baseball specialization versus the multi-sport athlete. And the reason why I bring this up too is in this time, right, we're dealing with COVID. In New Jersey, we lost our spring season, so no kids really played spring high school baseball, although club did pick up in the summer, and I know fall baseball is picking up. So in a weird way, these kids were forced into specialization up here. So obviously I want to know your thoughts on baseball specialization, but also how it's kind of dealing with, these times as well.
Yeah. Certainly I'm pretty adamantly opposed to specialization for any athlete, but I think baseball is a particularly concerning case because throwing a baseball is the single fastest motion recorded in sports, right? It's 7,000 degrees per second of shoulder and turn rotation. So that's a pretty crazy stimulus. And we certainly see, particular adaptations that take place in the throwing shoulder, right? We see, humeral retroversion. So it's effectively a warping of the growth plate that allows you to have more external rotation in your throwing shoulder. We see valgus carrying angles at the elbow where, certainly that valgus stress can effectively lead to a different resting posture. You just see all these things that, are normal findings in throwers that speak to just how stressful the activity is. But what's probably even more interesting about it is, this is a sport that demands, you do the same thing over and over and over again. And the better you do that, the better you are, right? So if you're a pitcher, you want the hitter to appreciate that your fastball, your slider, your changeup, everything looks exactly the same coming out, and then they all just go in different directions. So, we chase this unyielding specificity in the sport, right? Same thing kind of goes with hitting. Obviously, there's adjustability. But, you run the bases, you always run fast and turn left, like over and over again, we do the same things in this sport. And so that's why I think it's so important to have a contrast, right? And whether that's playing multiple sports, whether that's, actually going out and using strength conditioning as that stimulus to give you this, rich proprioceptive environments where you're training in more planes of motion, where you're kind of undoing some of those asymmetries that take place. I think it's critically important. And that's true of all of them. But, the thing we don't appreciate is you can look at the ACL research in soccer, right? And you can look at ankle sprains in basketball, these things. none of them even come close to what we're dealing with in arm injuries in baseball, right? 57% of pitchers have some form of shoulder issue every season, right? That's over half. Then you throw in elbows, you throw in necks, toss in a few blisters and nail problems. And before you know it, like literally 100% of players have some issue. So what we're always doing is we're effectively triaging baseball players. We're realizing this is a very unnatural act. It's very stressful, particularly when done at high volumes, at high frequencies, and at crazy high velocities. So we're always going to be managing, that are they above or below the threshold? And, you don't want to be there when you're 14. You know what I mean? It's one thing when you're 24 and you're getting paid a lot of money to do this. But it's a markedly different scenario when we're dealing with it, developing kids who are skeletally immature, who are encountering some of these stressors. And that's what we're seeing in baseball now. So this is, kind of going off on a different road here, but what we're seeing is a lot of elbow injuries in professional baseball, but more specifically, we're actually seeing a lot more in minor league baseball than we are in the big leagues. So we're seeing it in younger players, whereas the injuries seem to be leveling off or even slightly decreasing in big leaguers, right? Shoulder injuries are actually lower than they've been in a long time, but elbow injuries have kind of stayed high, but it's particularly problematic in the minor league side. And if you talk to some of these surgeons who are doing the repairs, what they're finding is when they go in and they do a Tommy John surgery on a 23-year-old minor leaguer, they're recognizing that ligament actually has previous areas of calcification. So it's not like happenstance just happened. He threw a 98-mile-an-hour fastball and it went on him at age 23. What actually probably happened was there were a lot of low-grade injuries at age 13, 14, 15, 16, where that kid went out and threw 120 pitches or, pitched back-to-back days or, tried to throw a curveball and in reality just made it into a terrible slider, something like that. And they're developing these weaknesses on the ligament that eventually when the athlete gets bigger, stronger, more mechanically efficient, and is throwing harder, those forces just exceed what that ligament can tolerate. So that's one more reason why protecting guys a little bit more carefully at the younger ages is going to save the game, in a lot of ways, right? It's going to, obviously keep people engaged because it's a big deal to miss a year of participation in the teenage years, but it's also concerning when, those same athletes are broken before they can get to the highest level to really show what they're capable of doing.
Yeah, that was actually going to be my follow-up question. You sort of answered it. How do you feel if you take, like you said, a 12, 13, 14-year-old, that's probably the kid who's just getting into club ball and playing in tournaments, which I'm going to give you a disclaimer. I can't stand a tournament scene. I think that's an issue because these kids are playing 6 games in a weekend as opposed to playing 2 or 3 a week. I'm sure that's another topic we can tackle. But how do you balance? Because I've worked with a lot of baseball players. Actually, my facility wasn't a baseball facility. I worked with a club team who I thought did a very good job of teaching biomechanics, and the kids would be involved with us in strength conditioning. Mm-hmm. But I know from talking to parents, right? Parents are they're hedging their bet, right? They're trying to figure out a way to make their kid be whoever he can be at some point. But how do you balance a kid who has poor mechanics and needs that extra work, but then go to the other side, and then that kid who probably, like you said, pitches too much or throws too much? And I agree 100%. It's a cumulative effect over time. It could be 3, 4, 5, 8 years of them playing club ball or playing too much. How do you balance a parent says, my little Johnny needs mechanical work and needs to get stronger? How much, what's the right dosage? And I know that's a very broad question, but what advice maybe would you give to us that we can relay to our parents? Because they ask us that question a lot. Yeah.
So I'll answer it in kind of 2 different ways. The first thing I'll say is, particularly more so at the higher levels, we actually have no idea what good mechanics really are. We have ideas about it, and we have ideas about mechanics that may optimize performance, but we have to realize that sometimes if you coach the different out of somebody, you take away what makes them successful, right? So Chris Sale, right? Chris Sale has, funky body type, crazy delivery that you would never teach to a young kid, but it's obviously made him an elite pitcher. Obviously he's injured right now, so we don't know how sustainable it was, but, it made him a lot of money and, won a World Series, all these different things. So you have to appreciate that a lot of the common things that we've thought about, right? Whether it's the inverted W or the Tommy John twist, some of these mechanical things that people thought predisposed throwers to injuries, actually, when you looked at the research, didn't hold water. And what's interesting is now we have more and more ways to actually assess this, right? We've got, biomechanics labs that are more accessible. In the past, it was ASMI or nothing. Now there are more of those popping up in the private sector. Certainly you have the Motus Sleeve, which is an affordable way to measure, elbow stresses and quantify workload. So we have more and more stuff at our fingertips. They're making us realize that we probably don't know nearly as much as we used to about what actually keeps an arm healthy. So I tend to look at mechanics much more as performance optimization, unless you're looking at something that's just a crazy outlier. And what also becomes hard is that mechanics are the single most debated topic in the baseball world, right? People struggle with it over and over again, and you can overhaul mechanics and make a player way worse and maybe not make them any healthier. And we've certainly seen scenarios where that takes place. So you have to, I think, go after the lowest hanging fruit. And so sometimes the play is make these individuals more athletic, give them stability in the range of motion that they have, take care of areas where they may have lost range of motion, things along those lines. I think you'll never go wrong in that regard. But what we also know that's very interesting is there are changes that happen from adolescent pitchers to advanced, professional pitchers. And one of the big things that's a great study to look at, they actually found that professional pitchers use 200% more lat recruitment during throwing than amateur pitchers do. So the idea is your lat's a huge muscle, right? It attaches down in your thoracolumbar fascia. Some people actually attach on the ilium on the pelvis. It runs up. It has a costals attachments on the rib cage. In 40% of the population, it attaches on the scapula. Then it runs to the front of the humerus and helps you to internally rotate, adduct, and extend the humerus. So it has this huge cross-sectional area that allows you to transfer force from your lower body up to your humerus. It has core control aspects to it. But what we realize is that high-level throwers basically use big muscles to do big jobs. What do we get in the younger populations? We get them using their rotator cuff, their biceps tendon, smaller muscles that are actually more stabilization driven to drive some of those high-speed movements. So there's something to be said about getting kids involved in strength and conditioning at a young age, teaching them to move efficiently, and actually work to optimize their ability to transfer force into their delivery. And obviously that pendulum can swing too far, right? We have pro guys that get way too strong and lat dominant and, lose tissue extensibility and wind up with a lat strain or something like that. But, you do need to kind of build that foundation where if a kid's out there throwing, 86 miles an hour at age 15 and he can't do a pull-up, you're probably wrestling with, a really, really tough discussion and a training approach for him.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, listen, I've definitely seen that. It's exactly what I've seen. I tell kids all the time, you need to be able to do pull-ups. I'm like, well, I'm going to hurt my elbow. Listen, if you can't do a pull-up, you're going to have some issues down the road.
You got bigger problems.
Yeah.
And those are the kids, unfortunately, that the ones who do throw hard at the youngest age, obviously they're exposed to the stressors that are higher than kids. I mean, you don't pull your hamstrings if you don't run fast, right? Mm-hmm. But what we realize with those young pitchers is not just that the stress of throwing is higher with every pitch, it's that they're also the kids who are usually bigger than all their teammates. You've seen 13-year-olds where there's always that one kid who's like 6'2", mm-hmm. and all of his buddies are like 5'6". And those are the kids that are most likely to get overused because either they throw harder, maybe they've got a banger curveball at a young age that no one's ever seen. And those are the kids, unfortunately, you don't hear about, because everybody catches up to them. They get hurt because they've had a crazy coach that, traded their arm for a bunch of useless trophies.
Listen, I couldn't have said it better myself. That's exactly how I think sometimes. And kind of going off of what you said earlier, when it comes to biomechanics and not knowing what it is, we deal in the speed world. So for us, we're always coaching technique, power development, obviously a lot of what Bill's talked about with fascia and things like that. Mm-hmm. One of the terms that I've used, and I don't know if this applies to what you're saying is, but we have a lot of athletes that sprint, mm-hmm. and they have good biomechanics in our mind. But I've always said there's style versus technique. And I mm-hmm. think at times, stylistically, there are kids who may not look perfect on a video or a TV, they're running fast and they're not getting hurt. So do you feel that's kind of the same thing with pitching? Is that what you were saying before, that there are some pitchers that do that?
I think that's a great point. Maybe this is a good parallel, right? You're looking at acceleration technique, like shin angles matter. If you're working with, the wrong shin angle, you're pulling the parking brake when you're trying to go 100. And we have so that's a certain checkpoint, right? That's a technique that is non-negotiable if you want to run fast. But, within style, you have guys that run with less hip flexion at top speed, right? You see guys who are like toned up like crazy in their neck and some that are very relaxed. You'll see guys that run fast, even with like, maybe not ideal arm actions. They're maybe a little bit more like side to side,
all over,
straight ahead. Yeah. It's like you see hockey players run. They always run like that, right? So I think is that's very true of baseball, certainly from a sprinting standpoint, where we're very rarely do we see an elite sprinter on a baseball field. And one of the reasons is because you're always going rotational to linear in baseball, right? So you swing a bat, you've got to run to first base. You've got to undo that rotation. You're a catcher that has to sprint back to the backstop on a pass ball. You're rotational, linear. You're a base stealer. You got to turn towards second base and get linear as quickly as you can. Center fielder going back on the ball. Everything has a rotational element for your linear. So a lot of times, you're trying to right the ship and deliver, good, sprint mechanics right away. The other aspect of it, you may be running with a glove on, which certainly can change some things as well. So those are all variability that we see just in sprinting. But when we talk about pitching, no doubt about it. So as an example, you are not going to throw a good breaking ball downhill if your arm is inverted at front foot strike. More specifically weight-bearing front foot strike. It's just a non-negotiable thing. It's physics, You can try to do it, but unless you have the quickest arm in the world, chances are it's going to be a really unpredictable breaking ball. Now, something like Corey Kluber is one of our guys. That was something that Corey kind of struggled with, in his minor league career. And then, around 2011, 2012, his delivery changed, and now he has one of the best breaking balls on the planet because he was able to get out of that position. And it's a matter of like, we're talking milliseconds, with a delivery like that. But, that's something to me that from a, technique standpoint is non-negotiable. So you can certainly look at pitch grips and things like that. But from a style standpoint, there's obviously a ton of unique subtleties, things that make guys more deceptive. You certainly see this with hitters with their approach. A guy like Justin Turner, who's very open, his hands are like almost down at his hips. Eric Davis back in the day was like that. You look at like a Julio Franco who had his hands like over his head out in front. I mean, Kevin Youkilis was a guy I trained.
Was crazy.
One hand that was higher up. All these guys have different cues that they use. And you'll actually even see players who use overcorrections in their cueing, right? So the big thing in the baseball world is like, don't swing down on the baseball now, hit the ball in the air.
Launch angle, all that.
Yeah, exactly. And, what's interesting is if, you look back years and years ago, like Albert Pujols would talk about how, takes the knob to the ball, swings down on the ball. But if you watch Pujols videos, he actually does it at all. Like you don't hit as many home runs and knock in as many runs as Pujols did. But, that was kind of the foundation for a lot of Bobby Tewksbury's work in the hitting community, is that sometimes players give themselves overcorrections to bring themselves back to neutral. So in many ways, you're like kind of feeding athletes into their dysfunctions so that they self-correct. So that's where, a lot of the constraint-based model and all that stuff has really become more and more popular. But the style versus technique is huge, no doubt about it. Baseball might be the absolute best example on the planet.
I think I see it all the time. And I just wonder, does it happen where a kid may go for, I don't know, extra batting lessons, extra pitching lessons, which, they probably need. Do they coach them out of it too much?
Yeah.
Do they try to overcorrect it? And what made them successful, now maybe they're changing it. And could that lead to an injury? Because maybe that arm slot for them was and again, you're way better than I am, but the arm slot they found that works, that doesn't hurt them. And then they overcorrect them mechanically. Now you have a bad arm slot that hurts them.
Yeah, no doubt about it. And I think, as Bill has talked about in a lot of his, his fascial research work, is that we adapt very specifically to the stresses that we impose on ourselves. So, making a dramatic change to someone's delivery, theoretically could expose people to positions that they haven't built up a tolerance to. Mm-hmm. And the other thing too, is I think historically the industry has done a lot of training downstream, thinking it will improve performance. So that might be changing a pitch grip, trying to change like how an individual takes the ball out of the glove or an arm action. A lot of times it's the upstream stuff that creates what you want. Maybe it's changing the direction from the back hip or how quickly the front side swings open. So we spend a lot more time on the lower half and repeatability there, and creating the right amount of both direction and distance. And a lot of times that takes care of a lot of the things further up the chain. So it's an important consideration to really work through.
Well, I think that might relate to the athleticism, and that was a question I was going to talk to you about. In my opinion, if kids are more athletic, say they play football or baseball or basketball or anything like that, if they're kind of comboing it, that athleticism. Most of those sports, you need to move your lower body, right? There's lateral movement, there's power movements, all of those things are happening. I know I feel this way, but do you feel that that's another way that it can help, we'll say a throwing athlete, not just a pitcher, a throwing athlete, number one, generate more power, because listen, that's what everybody's looking at now. They're looking at the gun, but also, understand how to use their body as part of the movement pattern that you're trying to achieve.
No doubt about it. I mean, I think at the end of the day, I don't think performance and health are mutually exclusive, right? There's an efficient way to move, regardless of sports. I think a lot of those interventions are things that can certainly help in that regard.
Yeah, because we train a lot of our baseball players, and again, we're fighting the fight of, well, they want to get more pitching in, or they want to get more games in, and we're trying to convince them, listen, you need to work with us as well. We want to keep you healthy, number one, but listen, we know kids want to throw harder, and I think kids are watching on TV, and I'm sure you've dealt with a ton of major league and minor league guys. The gun is I guess a blessing and a curse, right? Yeah. It gives you feedback, but it might give you too much or the wrong feedback at the time. How do you deal with that? Because listen, every kid, they want to throw hard. I mean, that's what I deal with every single day. How do you temper them to say, listen, this is what we need to work on, and it may take 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, years to get you to the point. And then how do you temper them that, you may not hit 90 miles an hour. Like maybe they're just not built to throw that way.
Yeah. I think the first, thing you do is you have, very candid conversations, and, I'm kind of fortunate that I can be super direct with people nowadays, just because of the kind of the caliber of guys that we deal with. So, and we built a large sample size of, what successful throwers have done. So, my first thing is I'll always have a conversation about where your window of adaptation is, right? You're throwing 86, but you can't deadlift 225. Like, let's have a candid conversation about what your biggest window of adaptation is. It's clearly not going out and doing a more aggressive throwing program. It's probably much more about body weight, patterning, putting strength in the right places, and then developing some power underneath it. So that's the first thing. The second thing that's always worked really well for us, and we're fortunate to be able to do this, is we have we have a collection of case studies who have done things the right way, of kids who haven't specialized and have gone on to become first rounders and big leaguers, of guys who have made good decisions about how to prioritize their health. So I'll literally walk a kid across the facility and have him talk to a pro guy and say, hey, this is, so-and-so, Morgan McSweeney is one of our guys. Morgan was 12 years old when he started training with us. He got cut from his high school team as a junior, came in and worked his butt off, got himself right, got a scholarship to Wake Forest without ever having thrown a varsity pitch. Went to Wake Forest, drafted by the Orioles. He's up to 99 miles an hour. Like, I can literally walk across the room and grab Morgan and be like, here's a kid who was with us at age 12, who's now almost throwing 100. Like, he has a lot of things to teach you, and how you're doing it is not the right path. Morgan, talk to him. And those are things that are impactful for a kid, because you're always trying to make them realize that what they see on Instagram or Twitter isn't the only way.
Yeah, I mean, listen, that's huge advice. So hopefully everybody rewinds that and listens to that part, because I think we all deal with it. We're in the private sector, right? We have kids who are coming in, they have dreams, and we want to help them get to those dreams.
Yeah.
But they be able to have that resource, but also too, we could also utilize you or utilize your research and say, listen, these are what these guys have all done. And I get it. There are some kids who did specialize and they are successful. So you can't say it doesn't happen, but if we could figure out a better way to make the kid just a total athlete. And my goal every day is, I said, listen, I don't want you to get hurt. If I can train you for 4 years or 5 years and you never get an injury, I think I've done a great job with you. And I think all the other stuff will happen. It really will. Because if you're injured, it's going to throw a lot of things off. One, you're going to lose time, but typically, mechanically, something might happen after you get injured. I've seen it a ton. So how have you dealt with that? Obviously, there are some kids that do get injured. Unfortunately, it could be because of poor mechanics, or they just dove the wrong way and they jammed their arm. How do you work with that and get kids to understand, okay, these are the things that we have to do to adapt your body to get it back to normal? And you may have to take a few steps back, take a few steps forward, because they don't like to wait. They want to get back on the field. Yeah,
I'll be honest with you. Like, I would say that, 60 to 70% of the time when you're dealing with young athletes, those injuries are blessings in disguise. It's a kid that was headed down a bad path, and it's the wake up call that he or she needed. And you can actually use it as an opportunity to educate them and get them to do things that maybe previously they wouldn't have done for you. So I try to always frame that in that context. And even with pro guys, like you have Tommy John surgery, that's a year to overhaul your body. You can do some pretty remarkable things and really push hard and challenge yourself in different ways. So I have traditionally had those conversations pretty regularly with guys with all levels. And I think it is something that, we have to keep in mind. One of the things that helps is we have physical therapists at both of our facilities, so they're in-house. So, being able to communicate with them on the fly, I think is really, really helpful in terms of regressing people according to, what they see in their therapy aspect of things. But we train, this year has been absolutely crazy from an injury standpoint in pro baseball. So I have like 7 different major leaguers that I'm watching over either in person or from afar after their Tommy John surgery. So, it's given me this really good sample size of knowing, kind of tendencies with each surgeon, each graft site, understanding the timeline. So I built this pretty good sample size. And, so we have guys that are, working out as soon as, 12 to 14 days after a Tommy John, and we're watching over them for that full year. So it's an amazing opportunity to get people to really overhaul the way that they feel, look, and move.
Yeah, I agree. And the other thing I've said to a few of my kids I've worked with, I think with COVID, in a weird way, maybe it was a blessing, because for us, especially in the Northeast, everything was shut down. So kids literally couldn't play for a while. And I know it was killing them. And I think mentally it definitely took a little bit of a toll. Now things are getting back to normal. We started fall sports here. How do you think that's going to look over the next year? I know maybe you can't predict it, but you had some people that were forced to take a break. Major League was forced to take a break, even though guys were training. Do you think that's going to have a positive or negative effect? Do you think it might be just kind of like a net zero? How do you think that's going to work? I know I'm putting you on the spot with that one, but
no, I think it's scary for a couple of reasons. One, certainly we saw in professional baseball, the injury rates were astronomically higher. And the NFL is following suit right now. The number of Achilles and ACLs that have already happened there are sky high. I think, it was probably a number of different reasons in baseball, but, a 3-week spring training compared to a 6-week spring training was just not enough. You always get a little bit more of a run up when guys have soreness, things like that. So I think that has to do with it. And what's scary is that's a much more controlled environment. Like, you have tons of sports medicine and strength and conditioning resources at those guys' fingertips in the NFL and MLB. Certainly was the case in European soccer as well. The German professional league, I think, was the first one to come back, and they saw it as well. So when you have players that have remarkable sports medicine resources at their fingertips and they're still getting hurt at astronomically high rates, that's really scary, because that the youth players are not going to have that. They're not going to have nearly as much of a ramp up for when they do a lot of these things. Mm-hmm. So, sure, I'm sure there were a ton of injuries. It's hard to document them. Guys have been doing their thing this summer, but I think the other challenge is going to be, do we worry that there are a lot of kids who are racing to get seen for college scholarships and, trying to find a place to play? And, so all of a sudden they're throwing, maybe excessively, or throwing when they're not ready, or they're doing whatever they possibly can to showcase. There's that. I think the other thing too is, like, we bank on access to facilities and expertise to try to keep these kids strong and healthy. There were a lot of states that, closed gyms down and, didn't give these guys access to the expertise, the resources they really need. And I mean, we can say all we want that, we don't need a facility. We can train them in parking lots, all that stuff. It's not the same. It's not the same level of care that we would have otherwise given them. So, I do worry that we are going to see kind of like a collection of kind of the fallouts from COVID injuries over the next little bit. Because it does seem like the trend was there, obviously, in professional levels. It seems like it's there in the college sports as well, although they haven't been as competitive, I guess, on all those different fronts as pro sports have. But, the youth sports are definitely going to follow suit.
Yeah, I mean, listen, it's been crazy. I think that's probably the word I've used more in the past, 6-9 months. It's just crazy every single day. And, us as strength coaches, we're trying to figure it out. We're trying to work with people. I have a lot of kids that want to train now. I'm working at the high school. Kids are trying to train, but I'm also trying to slow them down, because exactly what you said. I have kids. I have a showcase in 2 weeks. I have this in 2 weeks. I'm like, you haven't done anything in 3 months. Yeah. We have to be careful. So it's trying to walk that tightrope, which I think a strength coach has to do probably better than most people in our industry, because we're always trying to figure things out. And we don't control what they do outside of our facilities. And that's always an issue. We can give them advice, but can't always control it.
I think touch points are a big thing too. I mean, in other words, you see them regularly. It's an opportunity to check in with them. I mean, just like we see, obviously, it's terrible, but you're obviously seeing more child abuse cases go unreported and things like that in the era of COVID. People aren't going to the hospital, when they've got appendicitis as soon, because they're worried about getting infected, all that stuff. And I think the same thing happens, obviously to a much less significant degree with respect to how we manage athletes. How many of those kids, how many like hamstrings or ACLs do we head off because a kid reports, abnormal soreness to us? We modify some training. We understand how he moves and, work on something. So I think that's a big concern, is not having kids, in schools and, going after school programs and stuff like that. How many of those injuries are we going to not be able to prevent just because we haven't had FaceTime with them?
No, you're right. I mean, I've seen it. I've seen it with a few kids that I haven't seen over till the end of the summer, and you see them like, oh, my hips bother me, my hamstrings bother me, and I'm like, wait, hold on, and now it's okay. How do we kind of peel it back and then come up with a program that's going to work for them in that time frame, which is it doesn't always click. You know what I mean? Yeah. It's interesting for us. Like I said, it's crazy for us, and I think what you're doing is unbelievable. And I think everyone can take a ton from this call. I want to rewind it back and listen to it a few more times, but I had one more question. Sure, I wanted to ask about, and it's something more new for myself and also what Bill and what we're trying to incorporate in our programming. So the idea of breathing, right? So breathing is important. We know that. On a side note, I was lucky enough I spoke at the Vertimax Summit. I was one of the keynote speakers, and I spoke with Dana Santis, who I know very well.
She's the best,
I was blown away. I mean, I'm not saying that because I know her. I was blown away. It was the first time it made sense to me.
Yeah.
If that makes any sense. So how do you, or do you incorporate that? I know you work with her a little bit and you incorporate in your program. How do you work with that? And as far as core stabilization, how do you get that across to baseball players? Because I know it's not always the easiest sell in the beginning, that we have to work on breathing and core stabilization, and just want to pick your brain on your thoughts on all of it. I know you believe in it, but just want to
about it. For sure. So I think where breathing is powerful is you have the ability to both reduce bad tone and add good tone. Right. It's depending on how you position yourselves, how you approach breathing. So my first kind of foray into this world was, through like the Postural Restorations, got exposed to their stuff around 2009, 2010. And, that really changed my career in the sense that I realized that, just by manipulating the position of the thorax and, impacting the respiratory system could have really a pronounced impact on distal mobility and the outcomes that we got with athletes, whether that was with respect to maintaining shoulder internal rotation or improving IR at the hip or anything like that. Even like neck motion would come around really quickly. So I realized that there were probably a lot of times that we were stretching a joint that didn't need to be stretched. We were trying to stretch out an alignment issue. When you just crank on a joint that's out of alignment, you create instability. So, it got me thinking a lot more about, hey, before we stretch, let's understand why we're stretching and what we're actually stretching. And before we do it, let's make sure that we're back in some semblance of neutrality. And that's driven largely by the position of the pelvis and its interaction with the rib cage and the spine. So, I think that's where breathing has really come in for us. What you have to be cognizant of as a strength and conditioning coach is that, much like you hinted at, like PRI obviously uses balloons and things like that. If you're going to bust out a couple of balloons and do 9 different breathing exercises while Rage Against the Machine is blaring in the background, your athletes are going to check out really, really quickly. So, with that in mind, it's about being efficient. It's about having certain drills that you coach meticulously, but get in, get out. So I think a lot of people see, my writing or, hear me speak or anything like that, and they think it's this huge part of what we do. In reality, it's 1% to 2% of what we do, right? And it's, maybe it's a subtle cue that we add. It's a, half kneeling cable chop with full exhale at the bottom of each one. Maybe it's a reverse bear crawl with a full exhale on each step or something along those lines. Or it's just, 1 or 2 positional breathing drills that we'll use at the start of a warm-up. And we know, when you exhale full, you get recruitment of your anterior core, your rectus, your external obliques. You're probably toning down a lot of those accessory respiratory muscles when you're positioning your rib cage effectively so that you can actually use your diaphragm well. So, you can go down the rabbit hole as much as you want. Bill Hartman's got some great stuff on, wide versus narrow infrasternal angle. So that stuff that's impacting how we coach breathing, how we pick certain exercises more. So like a wide infrasternal angle, we'll probably do more stuff in supine. We'll do really forceful exhales, almost like trying to blow out the birthday candles. Whereas a narrow infrasternal angle, maybe we're going to do stuff in quadruped, and we use the cue of like fogging up the mirror. So it's a different kind of breath. So you just understand over the years how to use it a little bit better. And certainly Dana is a wonderful person to speak on a lot of this from her background and, in yoga and understanding how we can use breath to shift to more parasympathetic activity, even beyond just, what we talk about with the alignment aspect of things. So it's a game changer if you use it correctly. I think like anything else, there's some people that have taken it too far, right? So we have the zealots, for various disciplines that kind of fall underneath that umbrella. And so I always look at, when we adopt something like this, we have to figure out how it fits with our existing philosophy. We want to use a tinker, maybe it's 1 or 2%, but it's not like a full-on overhaul.
Yeah, I think the way you're saying is exactly how I would like to incorporate. I'm still trying to understand it. I'm a big believer in it. Until I fully understand it, I'm not going to implement it in my program. But I agree, using it as part of your warm up or your movement prep, it might be 1 or 2 or 3 exercises. There's also perceived value from a parent, right? They're watching my kid lay on the ground breathing. Like, what are you doing with my kid? But the other thing I noticed was, and I didn't understand it at the time, I was watching, some of the baseball games. I was watching a lot of the Red Sox players step out of the batter's box. And I'm like, what are they doing? Why are they all breathing like that? And then it hit me. Obviously, I know Dana worked with them, and JD Martinez, came to mind, and I saw him go through that, his routine that he came up with. So do you think, taking this breathing technique and try to understand it, definitely for the training aspect, but having a long-term effect where they're prepping themselves on their own? Because one of the things I try to pride myself on with the kids is that when they go to a field or a game or whatever, they can do the things that they're doing with us at the field to prep for that game, to get them mentally ready, physically ready. How do you feel that long-term effect has worked for some of your players if you've utilized it?
Yeah. So the first thing I'll tell you is if you look at, every single pitcher on the planet, hitter on the planet, like there is a breathing aspect to their routine. Like pitchers in particular, there's always a breath as they gather themselves. Actually Scott Brown at Vanderbilt's the pitching coach. He's a great guy, really, really good dude and a good friend. But, I've been in Vanderbilt's pitching lab where they have like each player's, pre-pitch routine, and there's always like a breath written in some capacity. And like you mentioned, you see guys doing it in the box as well. So I do think there's a place for it, just to kind of gather yourself and prepare yourself. I don't think we're necessarily manipulating, positioning with that or tone, but more we're implementing like an element of routine. So it's kind of like, you'll often see pitchers just like wipe the rubber clean, right, with their foot. And it's just a lot of guys look at that as like, all right, I'm wiping away what's happened and I'm on to the next. Like it's just a pattern they have. So I think there's absolutely a place for it. Every athlete needs to figure out what works for them. And you see the long, elaborate, kind of pre-pitch setup with like what Nomar did with his batting gloves, and David Ortiz obviously had a pretty elaborate one as well. But I do think there's something to be said about like just, finding breathing as part of a routine. I also know like Alan Jaeger is a close friend. Alan's, really specialized in long toss and yoga, but the mental side of things is really big. So he's huge on breathing a lot. I know a lot of the guys that he works with will actually meditate before they go out and make starts and things like that. So there's a pretty good track record of players using it to gather their thoughts and prepare their bodies. So it's definitely worth checking out.
Well, that's probably the other effect of it, right? The mental aspect. I think, how do we find kids to calm everything down? Especially kids. Kids are different than a professional athlete. You take a 16-year-old, they might be freaking out at every at bat or freaking out before every pitch. And how do they find that right routine that usually, a simple term, center them or get them mentally prepared or relaxed? Whatever, like you said, everybody's different. I think that goes back to the style technique we mentioned earlier. Yeah. I don't think every player is the same. I mean, I watch tons of pro sports, and you could see everybody has something that works for them, and trying to find that. And I think maybe introducing this to some kids may take hold of it right away. Some it may, may not click for them, in the beginning and until they get older and maybe really understand how their body works. I don't think a kid really gets it until 16, 17, 18.
No, I'd say that's even maybe on the young side, to be honest. Like I've seen, 18-year-old first rounders who still don't have really established routines and don't repeat their mechanics and all that. So I think one of the things that's challenging with young athletes is often they're, they kind of are shiny object syndrome, right? They'll bounce around from one thing to the next, and they never really stick with something long enough to critically evaluate how it works for them. And to be honest, like, we have, kind of a whole, quantitative analytics department here with the Yankees. And, a big part of what they have to do is really sort through randomness, right? If you have an athlete that goes out and, hits 7 home runs and 30 at bats, like it might not be at all indicative of what he's going to do over the course of a season or a career. So there's a certain number of at bats, pitches, things like that you need to build, a sample size that can be trusted. And certainly I think that happens with a young player, right? He does a new exercise and he goes out and gets 7 hits in a weekend. So he feels like he's on top of the world and he sticks with it, even if it might be complete garbage, or it's something that, he saw, somebody do on Instagram and he throws it in there. And then there's an element of randomness that worked in his favor. So I do think you need to give things, a longer run and really figure out what they're going to do. But, just as importantly, you got to have a rationale for everything that you do. I think that's, a question that I'll actually ask athletes a lot. Why are you doing that? What's that doing for you? Uh-huh. And, I think when we're talking about a pregame routine, anything like that, everything should be justified. It shouldn't just be like, well, it gets me loose. I'm like, all right, what does loose mean? You dig a little bit deeper and make them actually think about these things. And, oftentimes it helps them grow in the process.
Or like if they saw something on Instagram, they thought it was cool. Right?
That's it. It happens. It's
amazing.
Amazing. We have to compete with Mark Zuckerberg to do our coaching the right way, but
it's true.
It's the reality we're up against.
It's true. It's totally true. Well, this was an unbelievable call, unbelievable podcast. I think, we could talk 8 hours. I mean, your brain, I could tell is going a million miles a minute. I really appreciate all the feedback that you gave us and all the coaches out there that are going to listen to you. We wish you continued success, obviously in your private business, but, working in the big leagues, and hopefully you're out on the bubble for a couple more weeks. I mean, that would be the ultimate dream for you.
Right on.
How could people find you? I know obviously you have a website and social media handles. So why don't you just give us all your spots so people can get more information from you?
Yeah, for sure. It's just at Eric Cressey on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. The website is ericcressey.com. We've got a free newsletter and, a blog that I update pretty regularly. And then the podcast is honestly probably the thing I would encourage people to check out the most if they're really interested in this baseball world. It's the Elite Baseball Development Podcast. You can find it on iTunes or elitebaseballpodcast.com. But that's a fun one because we talk to a lot of players, but we also speak to sports scientists, orthopedic surgeons, physical therapists, skill development folks, nutritionists, mental skills folks, just because we want to give people a really multifaceted development. So I actually have a sports medicine series coming out pretty soon where we speak with a few different orthos and PTs and manual therapists. And actually Bill's podcast is going to be in there. We talk fascia training and stuff too. And it was actually a really fun chat. So they can check that out when it starts back up here soon.
Well, cool. Well, again, everyone should definitely hit you up. I subscribe to your newsletter. It's great. So I enjoy that every week. I get your emails, and I think
thank you very much.
Listen to your podcast a little more as well. And again, I thank you so much for your time. I know you're really busy. You're getting ready to head over to the field. So best of luck. Hopefully, we don't hear from you for a few weeks and you're having fun out there. And hopefully your wife has a great anniversary when you get back. Maybe bring her some cool stuff back to San Diego.
Awesome. Thank you very much for having me, Steve.
Thank you, Eric Cressey. You're the man. I appreciate it.